All righty. So I saw good old Vasharino. You know, a lot of these bread tubers just kind of say the Holocaust occurred, and then Israel, but Israel is bad. But they don't say it's Nazi government though. They don't want to say that. They don't want to say it's like a fascist government or anything else like that, or it's an ethno state. They don't say shit like that because it's like, well, Netanyahu is bad, but we don't really, like I say. And they say this because, once again, the situation in Israel is heating up. Depending on what angle you want to look at it, in terms of expansion, Israel is going to try to continue to attack Syria and Iran. A lot of folks will just say, well, but there's also a lot of stuff going on with the Palestinians. Now, I want to fill in the blanks here. I think I did a video about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. A lot of stuff happened between the Sho'ah, the Holocaust, and the creation of Israel. A lot of stuff occurred in that amount of time. You had groups like the Stern Gang, of course, which tried to make deals with Hitler to get support for them. You had that. You had a lot of folks who were making their move slowly but surely. You had people like Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, who was in England, who was in Great Britain. You had, of course, people like Abba Kovner, who had been fighting as a partisan in the Second World War. Amongst their exploits, they blew up a train. And eventually I'll get back to that book, Avengers, and I'm probably not going to read it on stream, but eventually I'll get back to reading it and kind of get a better idea. But anyway, to get an idea of what occurred with them. And then, of course, you had people like Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin had been arrested in the Soviet Union and overall was safe. He was able to get out of the Gulag eventually, and he would become the leader of Irgun. Of course, Irgun being one of the... it depends on who you talk to, but in general, Irgun were considered thugs in a lot of ways. Irgun were the thugs. They were they were more of the unprofessional folks compared to a group like Palmach. Now, Palmach, professionally trained military force within Mandatory Palestine, and had been through a lot of stuff, and they were meant to help the British Army in North Africa, but it never happened, and they continued to defend the borders and everything else within Mandatory Palestine. I'm saying this because there's a lot of different groups, and then of course you have the larger organization of Haganah as well, and you had groups like Hashomer Hatzair as well. Once the Second World War ended, Abba Kovner said he wanted revenge. And so he joined with his domestic partner, Vitka Kempner, where they had a child together, and people like Joseph Harmatz. And they formed a group called Nakam, also known as Jewish Avengers. And they planned to poison 5 German cities with arsenic. This is something a lot of folks don't like to talk about. They don't like to talk about Nakam, this and that, but it did occur. Basically, amongst a lot of, like I say, it's very sketchy to say the least, but apparently Abba Kovner did have connections with Chaim Weizmann, and the arsenic, as far as I know, was created by one of the Katsir brothers, or by the Katsir brothers. Of course, they would later, one of the Katsir brothers, Ephraim, I believe, went on to become Prime Minister of Israel. But the arsenic was created, and basically, to make a longer story short, Abba Kovner was arrested on a ship. I don't know how they got, but they threw the arsenic overboard, and Abba Kovner was arrested. Joseph Harmatz, strangely though, was on the same ship, but he wasn't arrested. I don't know how that is. Maybe he wasn't on the same ship. I'm not sure. That's kind of, like I said, the details are a little fuzzy. But nonetheless, Abba Kovner was in jail in France, I believe, in Toulon. So Joseph Harmatz, they scrapped everything and they went to Plan B. They couldn't get to all the cities. So they decided to aim straight for Nuremberg with all the Nuremberg rallies and all that. And they went to the Langwasser prison camp, which ironically I believe was known as Stalag 17. So they get there. They work in the bakery. And they are able to, one night, they get this arsenic, they turn it into a paste, and they put it over all the bread. And they get however many loaves they got. They're startled by an MP that's flashing their light in there. So they scurry away, and they wait. Here's another wrinkle to the story. Another wrinkle to the story is that they send all the doctors that they can to this Langwasser prison camp. This is one of those mysterious stories. And people had their stomachs pumped. Now, if you listen to the Israeli version of things, 200 German POWs, some concentration camp guards died. Others say nobody died. Like I say, it's kind of a mysterious thing. But they decide, basically Abba Kovner and the rest of Nakam decide they're going to fight for the independence of Israel. So they come back to Israel and they fight, and they join Haganah. Haganah, of course, being the group that was started by Yaakov Jabotinsky, who was a former British Army officer, of course, a dedicated Zionist. He had passed away. He's considered more of a, like I say, according to my reading from the Avengers, is that they kind of considered that to be more of a fascist group, but kind of ironic that they joined them. And even though, from my reading of Abba Kovner's, account, or excuse me, Rich Cohen's accounts, who talked to Abba Kovner before his death in 1987, they had read Marx, they had read Lenin. These were dedicated socialists, but they were also Zionists. There was this magical thing called Marxist Zionism. And so you had a legitimate Marxist a Marxist Zionist party known as Mapam. You had Mapai, which was the Social Democratic Party, and that was where I'm trying to think of it now. I'm sorry. I always forget his name. Yeah, because people always forget about Chaim Weizmann. My mind is gone, everybody. Let's see. We go here. Hey. Let's see here. David Ben-Gurion. There we go. Yeah. David Ben-Gurion was part of the Mapai party, the Sukdim party. A lot of stuff was being set up. So they wanted a form of socialism. Now, ultimately, Mapai kind of broke up, and they kind of got taken over. There were also groups like Poal Zion or Zion as well. Like I said, there's a lot of deeper history there, which most of which came down to the fact that they were just Marxist in name only. They were really just Zionists. They didn't care about Palestinians. They just wanted their land. But anywho, what occurred after that? Or what occurred around this time? Okay, so you had, these, left-wing folks who joined Haganah. You also had groups like Irgun. I'm going back to Irgun. So Haganah was more of a professionally trained military force. Haganah were considered thugs, basically. They were considered ruthless. This is something that, even people like Albert Einstein said, where people in Mandatory Palestine were afraid of the guns and bombs, but they are more afraid of Irgun coming in, because Irgun were unprofessional. They were just lousy. That's the whole thing. They'll try to big themselves up, but the thing is, nobody liked Irgun. And I'll talk about 3 events, and then we'll go ahead and try to wrap this up. But the thing is that in amongst this as well is that you had an Aliyah, the return to Israel. This is the 3rd Aliyah. Let me make sure here I'm correct on that. Yeah, the 4th Aliyah. Okay, so it's the 4th Aliyah. There we go. And of course, it brings me to the artist Aliyah, which, she was very talented, but no. Okay, let's go back to 3rd Aliyah then. Okay, the 3rd Aliyah. Okay, that lasted from 1919 until 1923. Okay, Balfour Declaration, like I say, Baluk. I'm trying to think of it. But anyway, there is another Aliyah that occurred right after the Second World War to return to Israel. Okay, so in amongst that, you had this group Irgun. Irgun by this time was led by Menachem Begin, who had been released from the Gulag. And Irgun planned to bomb the King David Hotel, because they thought, well, we're gonna get us some Anglos, right? The eternal Anglo, right? So what happened with that? Well, from the actual guy who dropped the bomb, he dressed up in Arabic garb, Arabic clothing, threw the bomb dropped the bomb, I should say, into the place, and then ran out, presumably, and it blew up. What occurred after that? Well, it blew up. It did not kill the Brits that they intended to. It killed mostly Jews and Palestinians. Now, where do we go from here? In amongst the search for Menachem Begin, who was dressed up as a rabbi, they found other members of Irgun. 3, in fact, a couple of which were Holocaust survivors. So what happens from here? There's a trade, because in amongst all the troubles that are going on with this war in Palestine, you have captured the Irgun had captured 2 British sergeants. This is what's known as the Sergeant's Affair. What happens from there? Well, the British basically say, bugger off with that deal, bollocks to all that, and they hang all 3 of them. They hang all 3 of those folks. And so Irgun says in turn, okay, we can do you one better. So in the Sergeant's Affair, they hung those 2 British sergeants. Now you have to remember, amongst this time, a lot of the Zionists were shooting British soldiers as much as they could. They were finding their camps, stealing their guns, this and that. This is a fairly common thing at that time, like I say. it is what it is, right? You're fighting for your home, your real homeland now. You're not gonna deal with the Nazis. You're not gonna deal with the Brits. So we have from there the amongst the many battles, this and that, and of course you had people like General Nasser of Egypt fighting there as well on behalf of the Palestinians. Not able to gain anything, and unfortunately had to leave. So you had this War of Independence till 1948, right? And so there you had the creation of Israel. So, like I said, that's a very quick and dirty measure to it. And there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of other stuff in there that can be left out, that I've left out. But the thing is, though, is there's a lot of this back and forth where it's like, well, yeah, the Holocaust occurred. It was bad. Israel, it's not an ethno state, but it's something else. And I don't know. Like I say, they walk on eggshells over this type of thing. They're just like, well, we need to support the Palestinians, but we don't like Hamas. We don't like Hamas. We don't like Hezbollah. We don't like them. BDS is okay. We like them, even though pretty much most states in the U.S. have banned BDS. And anybody that works for BDS, as we know, or any officials, you're going to be pretty much made a non-person, a person non grata. This is happening with cities in the state of Texas here. There was somebody, I think, who was higher up that said, we don't support BDS. And because of that, they got no federal money after the flood damage. No money for you. I can't remember which city it was, but, no money for you. And there have been Palestinians and other Muslim teachers in the state of Texas who have been kicked out of their jobs because of this. People like, Vosh say nothing about that. They are anti-Zionist, but they, like I say, we're very careful about it. And, this is why I don't really like the anti-Zionists. And they have to play this game of anti-Semitism. This is what anti-Semitism is versus this isn't. And of course, people are going to say, Goyim, what are you saying? They're going to say, Shabbos Goy, shut your mouth. But anyway, it's a very, very messy history, to say the least. And I'm no historian. Please don't, take this as word. But the thing is, though, is a lot of people don't talk about the history of the creation of the current state of Israel. And, the whole Ashkenazi thing and, the Sephardic and, of course, oh, wow. AOC makes a tweet about, we support those people and, we support the Palestinians. You going to give them any money? Hell no. We know that you'll break like a pretzel. We know you will because you did it before. It's like, well, how do you feel about the Palestinians? Well. They still carry water for her. They still carry their water. That's just one of those things, isn't it? It's just one of those things. First, Aaliyah. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, here we go. The fourth. No. Okay, it's the fifth. No. Sorry. Aliyah Bet. Okay, Aliyah Bet. That is the immigration from 1933 to 1948. That is the actual, yeah. Okay, yeah. So Aliyah Bet. Aliyah B. Bet being the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet was a code name given to illegal immigration by Jews, most of whom were refugees escaping Nazi Germany and later Holocaust survivors. Modern-day Israel, they're also called by Hebrew the term Ha'apala or ascension. The Aliyah Bet distinguished from the Aliyah Aleph, Aliyah A, Aleph being the first letter. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, there you go. Anyway, It's an interesting little tidbit there, but it's a very complicated history, and a lot of folks don't like to talk about the in-betweens and all that. Like I say, Anglos are meh, like I say, at best. Nobody really likes Anglos. But yeah, I mean, like I say, people are very cautious about, their critiques of Israel. They're very careful. They walk on their little eggshells. They tiptoe around it, and they say, this is actually anti-Semitism to say, for people like Netanyahu to say that Hitler wasn't responsible for it. It was actually the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and then of course they present the whole nonsense where it's just like, well, actually Israel is a base of the U.S. It's actually a force of U.S. imperialism. Of course, ignore the fact that Israel designs their own weapons all the time. They have their own international connections with countries like China. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, yeah, if you're an idiot, I guess you do think that Israel is just simply a puppet of the U.S. and not the other way around. AIPAC? What? Come on. AIPAC doesn't have any power in the U.S. I remember hearing that from Vosh. I'm like, what? Are you an idiot? I think that he's just being disingenuous, but I really don't understand that. How can you say it's like they have their own design tank? It's like if you're a puppet government, they don't allow you to make your own weapons and have your own defense of your own country. They don't allow you to make, their own bullpup rifle like the Tavor, create their own tank like a Merkava, have, like I say, this is one of the delicate things about it. This is what people, almost like what Jason Unruh says, where it's just like, well, Jewishness is the real thing that's going to fight. Because whiteness was created to separate themselves from Jewishness. It's just like, like I say, they walk on eggshells, though. If they want to talk about, like I say, then when it comes to Hezbollah, they'll be like, well, we support Hezbollah, but they're full of shit. That's basically it. People like Vosh and Jason Unruh, I think, have reached kind of that horseshoe level thing where it's just like, well, actually Jewishness is going to save it. Jewishness is separate from Israel, and Zionism is, oh boy, it's just like, be big brain somewhere else. It's just like, ultimately this is why I don't like talking about Israel and Palestine and the whole, like I said, I think Western Asia, I believe is the proper way to call it. They don't like to say Middle East. All right, fine. But the Arabic world, can we say that? I'll say the Arabic world is something I don't like to talk about. In general, I don't like to speak on it. I did it earlier, and I remember there was that one Spurgeon chat when I, live stream more, but it's just like, it's not something I like to talk about. But I made a long, ranty video about it because I figure that a lot of people leave out the stuff in between. Oh, yeah. One other story. I think I forgot this. I kind of said the characters already, but I'll make sure again. So there was the infamous Battle of Deir Yassin. And it goes like this. Basically, Deir Yassin was a stronghold of Arabic resistance. Irgun, being incompetent as they were, had to call in Haganah. And Haganah started to lob mortar shells, this and that. And they came in and basically destroyed the whole village of Deir Yassin. Let me go ahead and see a Deir Yassin massacre. I'll make sure I get my details right here. Okay, here we go. Far-right Zionist paramilitary groups Irgun and Lehi. I didn't talk about Lehi, but yeah. Killed at least 107 Palestinian Arabs, including women and children, in Deir Yassin, a village of roughly 600 people near Jerusalem. I remember seeing a documentary about this. They have everything fenced off. You cannot take any pictures, this and that. It's a very, like I say, they come in and knock over the gravestones. Very dangerous. Anyway, the villagers put up stiffer resistance than the Jewish militias had expected, and they suffered casualties. The village fell after house-to-house fighting. Some Palestinian Arabs were killed in the course of the battle, others while trying to flee or surrender. A number of prisoners were executed, some after being paraded in West Jerusalem. In addition to the killing and widespread looting, there have been cases of mutilation and rape. Lovely. Palestinian historian Aref al-Aref counted 117 victims killed in combat and the rest in their homes. Number of wounded is estimated between 12 and 50. 5 attackers were killed and a dozen wounded. Massacre was condemned by the leadership of Haganah, the Jewish community's main paramilitary force, by the area's 2 chief rabbis and famous Jews abroad like Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Sidney Hook, and all those others. Okay. So let's see what we got here. 6th Prime Minister. Menachem Begin was Irgun leader at the time of the attack, though not present. Like I say, Irgun were seen as thugs. I've said this a few times, but I want to make sure that idea is pushed in. There's a lot of folks who will praise Irgun, but the thing is, Irgun, in the whole scheme of things, they were considered like thugs. They were considered just goobers who were just, they were out on it. They were just hoorays, as the British say. They were just hoorays, on a leap year. But Irgun formed in 1931, militant group that broke away from the mainstream Jewish militia, the Haganah. During the 1936-39 Arab revolt in Palestine, Palestinian Arabs rose up against the British. The thing is, Lehi, Irgun splinter group, formed in 1940, formed following Irgun's decision. I talked about the Stern Gang. Lehi and Stern Gang, I think, like I say. But anyway. But they also executed Jews that were sympathetic to Arabs as well. So that's also something that needs to be talked about. Palestinian Arab village, peace pact. Okay, let's go ahead and cut to the chase here. Witnesses: Meir Pa'il, intelligence officer. Battle plans. Pre-attack briefing. About 130 fighters participated in the attack, of which 70 came from the Irgun. Day of the attack. Fighters were driven to their assigned positions. The Irgun force attacked Deir Yassin from the east and south. Okay, let's see here. Let's go ahead and read this account from Yachin. After we filled in the ditch, we continued traveling. We passed 2 barricades and stopped in front of the third, 30 meters away from the village. One of us called out on the loudspeaker in Arabic, telling the inhabitants to put down their weapons and flee. I don't know if they heard and if these appeals had no effect. And I know these appeals had no effect. Survival told the BBC in 1998. This is Abud Mahmoud. Many times previously, a curfew had been imposed on the village, and when the British loudspeaker would call out at one end of the village, I could hear that at the other end. Moreover, a shout from Givat Shaul, even without a loudspeaker, would be clearly heard in our village. On the morning of that day, we heard nothing. No loudspeaker, no shots. We awoke to the sound of... no loudspeaker and no shouts. We awoke to the sound of shots. Irgun and Lehi commanders had believed the residents would flee, but the fighters encountered resistance. The residents did not realize that the point of the attack was conquest. They thought it was just a raid and failed to run while they had the chance. The villagers sniper fire from higher positions in the west, especially from Mukhtar's house. Lehi forces slowly advanced, engaging in house-to-house fighting. In addition to Arab resistance, they also faced other problems. Weapons failed to work, and few tossed hand grenades without pulling the pin, and the Lehi unit commander, Amos Kanan, was wounded by his own men. Genius. Meanwhile, the Irgun force on the other side of the village was also having a hard time. It took about 2 hours of house-to-house fighting to reach the center of the village. By 7 a.m., as many as 4 attackers had been killed. Ben Zion Cohen, the top Irgun commander, was shot in the leg and his place was taken by Lapidot, whoever the hell that is. Frustration by the lack of progress, the Arab resistance was taken out of the prisoners, which they began executing. Cohen reported that we have eliminated every Arab we came across up to that point. In the village, I killed an Arab man and 2 Arab girls of 16 or 17 who were helping the Arab who was shooting. I stood them against a wall and blasted them with 2 rounds from the Tommy gun. We had prisoners, and before the retreat, we decided to liquidate them. We also liquidated the wounded, as anyway we could not give them first aid. In one place, about 80 Arab prisoners were killed, and some of them had opened fire and killed one of those people who had came to give them first aid. Arabs were dressed up as Arab women who were also found, and so they started to shoot women who also did not hurry to the area where the prisoners were concentrated. Okay. Lovely, lovely. Like I say, this shows the example of how inept some of these, folks are. This is kind of like the equivalent of Wignats who think that they're going to start siege, bro. And yet when they actually encounter somebody that's going to fight back, they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. My cousin went out to see what happened to his uncle who was shot a few minutes before, and he was killed too. His father, who went out after him, was murdered by the same Bren, and the mother, who came to find out what happened to her loved ones, died beside them. Aish Edan, who was a guard in Givat Shaul, came to see what was happening, and he was killed. According to survivor testimonies, as many as 33 civilians were executed in the morning. Large number of Jewish wounded was a problem. Use of explosives. Palmach intervenes. Once again, Palmach, as I said, were the professionally trained force. They started to shoot mortar rounds. They fired 3 times at the Mukhtar's house. During the situation, Wedge concluded that the wounded could not be evacuated before suppressing all hostile fire. The cleanup. This goes on for a bit. Yeah, trucking and parading of prisoners. So they brought the adult males were taken to the town in trucks and paraded in the city streets, then taken back to the site and killed with rifle and machine gun fire before they were put on the trucks. The IZL and LHI men took from them all the jewelry and stole their money. Wow, no better than the folks they claimed to fight. No better. Behavior toward them was especially barbaric and included kicks, shoves with rifle butts, spitting, and cursing. People from Givat Shaul took part in the torture. Ergon Lehi press conference. 10 houses have been blown up entirely, said the historians doubt if that was true. Yeah, like I say, Deir Yassin was pretty awful. Yeah. 250 were killed. 107 villagers had died. 11 of them armed with 12 wounded. Appeals to the British. Praise, propaganda. Allegations of sexual violence. Denying the massacre. This is 1949, despite protests, the neighborhood of Givat Shaul Bet was built on what had been Deir Yassin's land, now considered part of Har Nof, an Orthodox area. 4 Jewish scholars, Martin Buber, Ernst Simon, Werner Senator, and Cecil Roth, wrote to Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, asking that Deir Yassin be left uninhabited or that its settlement be postponed. They wrote that it had become infamous throughout the Jewish world, the Arab world, and the whole world. Settling the land so soon after the killings would amount to an endorsement of them. Ben-Gurion failed to respond, though the correspondent sent him copy after copy. Eventually, his secretary replied that he had been too busy to read their letter. Half away lie Mount Herzl and the Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem. Isn't that ironic? Many of the village houses on the hill are still standing and have been incorporated into the Israeli hospital for the mentally ill that was established on the site. Some houses outside the fence of the hospital grounds are used for residential and commercial purposes or as warehouses. Outside the fence, there are carob. What is carob? Oh, it's a flower. Okay, it's a shrub. Okay, basically. Okay. And almond trees and the stumps of olive trees. Several wells are located at the southern edge of the site. There's also, 1952, a group of 4 wounded Irgun and Lehigh fighters applied to the Israeli Defense Ministry for veterans' benefits. The ministry rejected their application, stating that the Deir Yassin massacre wasn't military service. But the decision was reversed after the group appealed. This is, You don't hear a lot of folks talk about Deir Yassin, do they? You know, they will try to compare. They'll make these very bad comparisons between what happened, between Israel and Palestine. Then they compare it to the Chinese and the Uyghurs. That's very, very bad faith. Anyway, this has been going on for 36 minutes. I'm just saying the history is very, very complicated. And I'm just going to go in there and put my foot in my mouth just for you folks. And I hope y'all enjoy that. See you later and goodbye.